So I want to start with a very juicy story of how I moved to Southern California a few years ago from DC. And I moved to Southern California to start my workplace culture consulting business. But that is not the juicy part. The juicy part is I moved to LA knowing one person. And I moved into this really cute bungalow by the beach, just like you see in the movies. And about a month there, I fell in love with this great guy who I was certain felt the same way about me. Now, let's see if we can advance this. Nope. There we go. So, surprise, the guy I fell in love with was not the NBA star Chris Paul. That would have been really juicy, right? That would have made your Friday. It was not Chris Paul. But Chris and I went to college together at Wake Forest. And I have been a big fan of his ever since he used to dominate against Duke and Chapel Hill back in the day. On this particular night, though, that I want to talk to you about, Chris was playing in Game 5 of the NBA Finals for the Phoenix Suns. And I was at this party with my crush. We were on a couch outside watching the game. And the game starts to wind down. Unfortunately, the Suns are losing. And I start to open up to this guy. This is the first time we'd met each other, or the first time we'd hung out. And I start to open up about my physical disability. And I start to open up about having a brain injury as a little girl. And I got a question from my crush that I had never gotten before. And the question was, had I ever felt like a victim of my disability? And I took a deep breath, and I bit my lip, and I looked down. And at that moment, I decided to push away all of the fear and be honest with this guy who, I'll admit, I wanted to influence in a very certain direction. But I still managed to be honest with him. And I told him, I said, you know, I've never felt like a victim of my disability in my professional life, but I have felt like it in my personal life. And right then and there, I unloaded this shame to him that I had never shared with anyone else before. Now, you may be asking, why did I feel like a victim of my disability in my personal life? Well, I felt like a victim of my disability because at that time when I was having this conversation, I had never had a boyfriend. I had never been in a serious romantic relationship. And I was in my mid-30s and I was mortified by that. And up until about 6 months before I met this guy, I blamed that reality on my physical disability. Now, I'm going to spare you the suspense. I know everyone wants to know. Things did not work out romantically with this guy. But in my short time knowing him, I found something much more important than the boyfriend that I desired. I found my voice. Now, before I was published in the LA Times, talking about dating and disability, and before I started my workplace culture consulting business, I was ahead of people for a number of startups on the East Coast. And I was also a recruiter for Deloitte Consulting. Now, as a head of people, I had to influence quite a bit. I influenced my peers to adopt initiatives. I influenced our boards. I told stories with data. You all know this. I was here yesterday and I heard all of you talking about the various voices when it comes to influence. So when you're trying to influence, you have all of these voices going on in your head, right? Peers, boards, CEOs, founders. But do you know who's the most important voice is? It's your own. It's your own voice and your inner narrative and the story that you're telling yourself. So I had a brain injury when I was 8 years old. What started as me falling when I was on vacation in Washington, D.C., quickly escalated a few hours later to me not being able to raise my left arm on my own. So this clump of blood vessels had burst and was bleeding, and I eventually had surgery to stop the bleeding. And when I woke from surgery, I was unable to speak, I was unable to walk. And I had extreme muscle weakness all up and down the left side of my body. And after surgery, I had a lot of physical therapy. I had a lot of occupational therapy, a lot of speech therapy. And I'm incredibly lucky. I learned how to do lots of things, like obviously speak with you all today, and walk, and I adapted my walk to learn to accommodate weak muscles. What's most important in my book is I learned how to put my hair in a ponytail with one hand. All right? Voila. There we go. But you know what I didn't do? I learned all of those things, but there was one thing I didn't learn. I didn't learn how to emotionally respond to having a disability. So I grew up in southeastern Virginia, and whether it was a product of the family I was in or the time in history we were at, I didn't go to any type of emotional or talk therapy. And as a result, my emotions overwhelmed me. I didn't know how to handle them. And I was immensely sad at times, I was immensely angry at times. And what I really needed in that moment was I needed a positive influence. I needed somebody who had the tools to push me in the right direction. But I was 8, and there was no one. So what did I do? Did I give up? No. I became best friends with my inner voice, and together, we figured out how to power through. And power through we did. I've had tremendous professional success and other successes. But as I talk about in my LA Times column, that came at a cost. And that cost was shutting down a portion of my voice and my emotional identity. So sorry, I keep hitting this. After my brain injury, decades went by where I couldn't influence myself to move positively in my personal relationships. Telling someone that I loved them or that I wanted to date them terrified me. My voice was completely shut down there. There were other areas of my life where my voice never left me and I was able to influence myself. For instance, I remember as a young girl reveling in arguments with my parents about keyboards. And they wanted me to use a keyboard that is made specifically for a person with one able hand. And I said, nope, I'm going to learn how to use a full keyboard just like everyone else. And when I wanted to move to Washington, D.C. from North Carolina, a lot of people said, oh no, you're never going to do that. But I knew I could do it. My voice told me I could do it because I had learned to climb stairs again. A little move from North Carolina to D.C. was nothing. So up to D.C. I went. And I was a recruiter at first, and then I became a head of people for multiple organizations. And as a head of people, I advocated for employees like their voices were my own. And one thing I quickly found out is that I would become especially emotional when I was in a workplace and I felt like an employee was not being seen or heard. My voice would actively chat away inside of me, wanting to influence change on behalf of that employee when this happened. But just because my voice was chatting away on the inside doesn't mean that I was always able to influence in the way that I wanted or as often as I wanted. Just as I struggled to move the needle forward in my personal life, when emotions were concerned. I struggled to influence in the workplace when I felt so strongly about something. And as a result, there was a lot of crying, probably a little bit too loudly in my office. There were a lot of emails that were read 10 times over before sending, and there were a lot of sleepless nights. And I want to talk to you about one of those workplaces. So picture this. I'm the head of people. Our CEO doesn't respond or acknowledge to the majority of the emails that I send him. And yes, you're remembering correctly, these are the emails that I read 10 times over. In this office, we didn't have a lot of leadership meetings. The meetings that we did have always involved someone getting talked over. And as a result, a game of telephone played out throughout the organization, where each member of the leadership team would hear something different one-on-one. Now, you can imagine how that felt to someone like me, someone who was experiencing trauma with how to use her voice and how to influence. This lack of intentional internal comms really felt unsafe to me, regardless of the CEO's intention. Now, I want to talk to you about another workplace where I was a head of people. At this workplace, I was paired with a leadership coach. That was the standard offering for everyone on our exec team, because our founders knew everyone needed support. They didn't all need the same support, but everyone needed support. In that office, I also had a supervisor who encouraged me to take an HR speaking engagement. She could have totally done it herself, but she encouraged me to do it because she wanted me to flex my voice. Also in that workplace, and I'm going to date myself here, this is in the very nascent years of Zoom, and we were all in physical conference rooms. And on those walls, we had inclusive meeting guidelines up, posted in every conference room. Now, was that workplace perfect? No. No workplace is. Did that workplace completely solve the trauma I had around my voice and ability to influence? No. But they acknowledged it by having the tools in place to help me with my personal development. And because of that, I started to thrive. So the LA Times has a circulation of over 600,000 people. Yeah, let that sink in. This is quite the morning when my column came out in their Modern Love column about dating and disability. And it's been about a year since that column was published. And I still have people reach out to me almost every month saying how they feel seen after reading my column. And that is incredibly humbling to me. And I will be forever grateful to the LA Times and the city of Los Angeles for the power and status they have given my voice. I have gone from not fully owning my voice to having the ability to influence thousands of people through this column, through my writing, through my speaking engagements. But in order to do that, I had to reconcile what was going on inside of me. I had to reconcile why I could positively move myself and influence myself in so many directions, but couldn't tell a guy I wanted to date him. Why I could sit with our CEO and go through survey data any day of the week, but when it came to telling him an anecdote about how an employee didn't feel seen, my throat would close up. And in order for me to influence to the best of my ability, I had to come to grips with that, and I had to reconcile that. And my proposal to you all today is that I am not an anomaly. Yes, I am pretty positive there is no one on the planet that moves the way that I do. But I guarantee there are people in your workplaces right now who struggle to speak up and who struggle to influence themselves in a positive direction. There could be people who have huge systemic challenges in front of them. There could be people who have the sudden onset of a disability in their 40s or 50s. There could be people who have an invisible disability that they are hiding. And in any and all of these situations, these people may not know how to ask for help, and they may not know how to handle the challenges in front of them. I know that I didn't. And my hope is that this is where you and I come in. So, as evidenced by the Chris Paul opener, perhaps, it may be clear that I love my alma mater, Wake Forest. Wake Forest is also where Dr. Maya Angelou taught. And one of the things that Dr. Angelou said is do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, you do better. So if Dr. Angelou were here today, I would tell her that I know a lot more about my voice than I did 3 years ago. And I know a lot more about my ability to influence and the cost of shutting down a portion of my voice. And my doing better is me telling my stories. Now, telling personal stories isn't everyone's version of doing better, nor should it be. But I know it's my way to help others thrive. And as you leave this conference knowing more about a multitude of topics, I hope you will consider what doing better means to you and to your organizations. And so as I close today, let's hop back to LA for one more last juicy story. So about a year ago in LA, I was going to a bar to play trivia one night with a friend. And if you can imagine, this friend was cuter than Mr. NBA Finals. And so we're going to the bar, and we had parked the car, and we're walking to go to the bar. And I had never complained to this friend about curbs or steps or anything of that nature. I had never really complained. But he knew that a couple months prior to us going out this night, I had toppled off of his steps when I was going up on his porch to try and leave something in his mailbox. And when this had happened, I'm going up the steps and I overestimated my mobility, which is something I do a lot. Fell off the steps. He wasn't there, but I relayed it to him afterwards as sort of a badge of honor because I was proud. When I fell, I got up on my weaker leg, and that had never happened before. So anyway, I told him the story. He knew about that. Fast forward a couple months. We're going to the bar. We're walking from the parking lot, and I go to step up from the street to the curb. And when I do that, he looks at me and he says, yeah, what's up with this place anyway? Like, what's going on here? Where are all the curb cutouts? And after a lifetime of questioning my visibility in the world, that one comment penetrated me to my core. And I will always feel deeply seen by that person because of that one comment. Now, did he run around LA fixing every missing curb cutout for the rest of his life? I have not seen the proof of that yet. But his version of doing better was he acknowledged that the world could do better for people like me. And so as I close today and we go forward, I hope that you all will join me and my friend and that workplace I described in doing better in your sphere of influence, no matter how big or small. Thank you so much. Thank you. And now I'm honored to invite Howard to the stage to talk to us about his perspective on influence. Thank you. That
was great. Thank you. Hi, I'm Howard Pyle. I'm the founder of an organization called Experience Futures. and I'll tell you a little bit about that and what we do. But first, I have a little bit of a dirty secret to tell you, a little bit of a confession. This is how I spell the word restaurant. And I figured in a group of writers and esteemed communication executives, this would probably be the most offensive thing that I could put up on screen. But it gets better. Here's 4 more times of me trying to spell the word restaurant. And this is how my brain is wired. My brain is wired differently. My brain is wired around not being able to really think through language in the way that we're supposed to think through language. And it's not uncommon. I'm crushingly dyslexic, and so is my son. And he actually also had a hearing issue when he was younger, so he has language and speech issues. He's 10. And it's interesting because I do a lot of work with him. This isn't my business, this isn't my profession, but I wanted to start here to tell you a little bit about what goes into the work that I do. And my background is I was a CTO, I worked in startups, I was a senior partner at Ogilvy, where I worked on IBM, then I went to IBM and I was a VP there, and actually John Iwata's organization, where I ran a network of design studios. I was a senior vice president at MetLife. I ran global customer experience and design and launched the global brand, the first new brand in 30 years. We rolled out in 40 markets. And now I resigned from that corporate job a few years ago, and I started this social impact organization called Experience Futures. And I'm telling you this, and I'm starting with the fact that I have this intellectual disability, and I've done these things not as a success story, but actually there's a different spin on this. There's this twist to say that I have been able to manage in a corporate setting as a knowledge worker, as someone who has to communicate and has had to write tens of billions of emails and presentations and documents, et cetera, because I have something that I would consider to be a type of privilege that we don't talk about. I have a lot of different types of privilege, but this one in particular is very important for us to talk about in our era, which is I have digital privilege, which means that I can navigate through PowerPoints and emails and presentations, because at some point when I was younger, somebody sat me down, and actually it was a couple people, and showed me how to use early versions of word processors, early versions of spell checkers. And I have, at this point, probably about half a dozen, maybe a dozen different tools that I use on a daily basis, even before generative AI and ChatGPT and all that stuff, in order to manage and write emails, in order to manage and write presentations. And I can still, to this day, I'll write an email, I'll take it, I use Gmail, we use Google Workspace. I will look at I have the Grammarly plugin, it'll go through, and then I've got the Gmail grammar checker, and then I'll take it and I'll copy it into Grammarly, and Grammarly will catch things, and I'll copy it and paste it back, and I'll send it, and I will still miss the fact that I have the word "and" twice, or that I missed a verb, or that I completely, I spelled "there" totally wrong. This is just, and as an executive, it's incredibly embarrassing. And it actually hasn't been until the past few years that I've actually talked openly about how that's there. And here's the interesting thing, is that it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon. None of these things are. And so as someone who has built and created communications platforms, digital experiences, brands, software platforms, the one thing that we often get told is that there is a target user or an ideal user. And the thing that I'm here to talk to you today about is that the average user isn't average. We're not an organization that focuses just on dyslexia or ADHD or neurodiversity. We're an organization that's looking at this next era of our digital lives and thinking about how to design for individual need. And that's pretty hard. That's a hard thing to do. So 80% of internet users have very unique digital needs. So here's what I mean by that. So if you think about Gen Z, there's a lot of articles out recently, and those of you that focus on workplace and workplace enablement, they don't have training on antiquated interfaces like Excel or Xerox machines. They don't know necessarily how to use the interfaces. They don't know what that little floppy disk icon is, right? They're largely mobile-only users. Older users over the age of 55 have very specific digital needs. They need to be designed for, they need to be written for in specific ways. People with neurodiversity, people with physical disabilities need certain types of design and content presented to them so screen readers can access them and use them. And when you begin to rack these things up, you begin to see that there is no such thing as an average user. There's no such thing as a user that has the ideal set of buyer behavior, common profile, ability to understand your design, and oh, by the way, your organization is struggling just to maintain that one digital presence, that one digital product and service. So how are you going to manage that? How do you deal with that? That's like a problem that's too big to solve. So I want to tell you a little kind of context here. This is a woman named Ingrid Johnson. She lives in Colorado. And there was a story about her trying to access government benefits in the state of Colorado, and it happened to be unemployment in this case. And in order to access this government website, they wanted to verify her identity. Great, makes sense, government benefits, verify your identity. So they partnered with this other company, this platform, to verify her identity. And the request was upload a photo. Upload a photo of yourself using your phone. But the instructions were vague. They didn't make sense. She had an older smartphone. She didn't know how to do it. This woman spent 2 days trying to upload a photo of herself and ended up having to go into a virtual queue to chat with an agent to get verified over video, which took her 7 hours, right? And so when you think about it, we have this crushing problem where people who need digital access or digital resources are cut off from them because they don't know how to navigate the digital tools in their lives. And this problem is widespread. And it's not just within government, it's within industry, and it obviously affects the way that we sell. It in fact impacts the way that we engage employees. It impacts the way that we access healthcare, finance, education. So this is like a widespread systemic problem. And as companies, both public and private, move to being digital only, this becomes a radical challenge and actually is about access. It's about large-scale access. We have a tsunami of digital tools. When you think about managing your healthcare, you've probably got dozens of different tools for insurance, for your doctors, health portals. When you think about managing your finances, think for a second, how many different digital tools do you manage your finances with? How many of them actually work on mobile? I had to answer a question yesterday for my accountant for tax season, and I was on the road with my son, and I only had access to my mobile phone, and the question that he asked me wasn't available to me by using the Fidelity app. Sorry, Fidelity, if you're here. I needed to know the signatures on a specific account, and it just wasn't part of their mobile app. But what if I'm a mobile-only user? So mobile-only users, let's talk about that for a second. There's a huge correlation between mobile-only users and socioeconomic lines, right? The vast majority of people that live in households that make less than $30,000 a year are mobile-only. And by the way, 88% of them are non-white. So if you want to design for equity, design for mobile only. This is just one example, right? But how do you do this in a big organization? And this is what we would describe as this next layer of the digital divide, right? It's the digital experience divide. And the academics talk about this as this idea of design access, content access and cognitive access. Sure, you have a device, you have a computer, you have internet access, but do you know how to use it? That's the era that we're entering into, right? So this is what we're focused on. We're focused on, as an organization, addressing the experience divide. How do you give people access to the tools that they need when they need it? And we have to move away from this idea of, in every organization, we're designing for one user that's our ideal target user. This idea of one size fits all in digital spaces. Because it doesn't work anymore. It literally doesn't work anymore. So this is where the kind of big bombshell happens. And in this conference, it sounds like you talked a lot yesterday about AI, and that's where things really begin to change. And so here's the idea. If the average user is an average, and the majority of people have very distinct digital needs, and your organizations have a hard time keeping up with how to manage those things right now, how on earth could you design for all these individual possibilities? And the answer is, we can begin to automate different aspects of what different people need. So here is an optimistic, positive, potential use case for AI, right? So if you think about it, there's actually the possibility of understanding what different abilities and different cohorts might need. So I'm an older user. I need you to explain to me why I have to give you my username and password. I only have a mobile device. I need you to present this particular screen to me in a way that I can use it on my mobile device. And if you begin to employ AI to generate different types of experience for different individual needs, not only are you beginning to address that, but you're beginning to actually open up your organizations to new markets if you're a for-profit organization. And so there's this interesting question that happens, which is, if you agree with that, if you buy that hypothesis, and our prediction is that in the coming years, the digital experiences that we interact with, the mobile sites, the websites, the apps, the content will be generated largely by AI. There's both an imperative, which is for your organization to align that to your social impact guidelines, with your ESG goals, with your DEI values. But you also need to think about the opportunity there, which is opening yourself up to newer markets, designing for individuals, driving loyalty, driving engagement with employees. So how do you do that? How do you think about matching that? And so this is, of course, the point at which I'm going to pitch my organization. And I'm literally asking for your help at this moment, right? So my organization is called Experience Futures, and we have two parts. We have a nonprofit, which is focused on education, awareness, publishing, creating data and open source tools for organizations to create more inclusive digital experiences using AI. But we also have a for-profit organization that helps companies create new digital experiences for their audiences, for their employees, aligned to inclusive goals, aligned to their social impact goals, but in order to drive growth, in order to drive engagement, in order to drive loyalty. So here's the pitch, here's the question, and it's a genuine question for this audience, which is, how do you pitch the intersection of the business opportunity and social impact? Do you go to the CFO and pitch growth? Do you go to the CHRO and pitch employee engagement? Do you go to the board and do you talk about social impact goals? Do you go to the CEO and talk about mission and purpose and aligning to that? And this is literally the question that we've been wrestling with for the past year and a half. You know, we started as a nonprofit. We began publishing. We began doing partnership work with organizations, and we ended up creating a separate for-profit just mainly to be able to go and sell to the people who need to be sold to and talk about influence and mission to the people who are willing to hear that message. Because it's very difficult to have the same conversation in both. And as someone who's been an executive at Fortune 100 companies, I can tell you right now, the thing that I will always find is that there's some people in the room that nod their head at the mission, and there's some people in the room that only nod their head at the dollars. And how do we bring them together? And so this is the thing that I would ask in a session on influence. And I'm not asking you to quit your fancy SVP job at MetLife and go start a nonprofit. But I would say as influencers in your organization, there is a role, especially for communications leaders, on bringing those 2 points together. How do you help an organization link together the idea of value and impact? Now, we do that in other areas, right? We do that in other areas. We're thinking about ESG from a sustainability perspective and an environmental impact perspective. But where did that start? It didn't start because everyone in the organization suddenly began to believe that their organization needed a sustainable supply chain. It's when the CFOs began to agree that there would be market risk and it would be valuable for the organization, so they were willing to invest in it. I mean, that's just the truth of it, right? So how do you begin to play out this idea of equity in digital spaces? And I'll tell you, I've been in leadership positions running design for large organizations where we've had multiple class action lawsuits because of basic ADA requirements not being met, right? And when you look at it, there's a dollar problem there. So how do you influence that? How do you influence that? Do you go to your C-suite and pitch them on both? Or do you just go to the business leaders and pitch them on the value? This is the question to ask about this. So we have 2 things in our organization that we're focused on, that we're introducing. One is a process model that helps organizations. It's like the Higg Index in sustainable apparel, and it's like the B Corp certification. It's this idea of going from strategy down through design, matching business KPIs and social impact KPIs, thinking about how you're applying AI in an ethical way, and launching digital experiences. And we actually believe that there's a way and that there's a need for organizations to have a standardized process model in order to think about how those goals and those values are linked. And we're actually in the process of rolling this out, and we're looking for partners to help us workshop this within organizations. The other thing that we're doing is we're building the largest repository of inclusive design rules. So you can go to the WC3 consortium, you can go to most organizations, IBM, Microsoft, Google have published accessibility guidelines. There's blog posts, there's rule sets created. We're taking all of that and we're building a language model that we can use to drive AI queries and generation of content and generation of design by being able to access this large model of inclusive design rules. And we're going to make that publicly available on our nonprofit, but it's also part of the software products that we're building. And there's really 3 things that I want to leave you with. One is that I did some advisory work with a big tech startup last year, and their design team, their whole rally cry was design for all. And their definition of design for all was start with ADHD. And I was like, well, what about the fact that there's 3 types of ADHD? And what about how older people and people with ADHD don't actually have the same digital needs? And so suddenly there's this shift that has to happen within your teams, within your organizations. It's not designed for all, it's designed for each. And that's an enormous problem. How are you going to do that without automation? It's a real question. The second is this idea of digital sustainability. I guarantee you that somewhere in your organizations, you've got a team that's focused on digital accessibility, that's focused on AI ethics, that's focused on how you can make technologies more inclusive. That's like an easy win for your ESG strategy. How do you take those efforts and elevate them and report them out as part of what you're doing in your ESG goals to your board? That's a great opportunity. It's easy win. And the third thing is this idea of generative AI can actually be a solution for a lot of the problems that we have about engaging with people individually. And it's actually, there's an opportunity there to design for individual needs on that. But you have to plan for it. You have to plan for generative AI. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Thank you. And I'd like to invite Jennah up to this stage. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Oh, I think I need a clicker. Yeah, all good. You're good. Thank you so much. All right, hi everybody. I am so excited to be with you here today. I missed yesterday, but I heard a lot of talk about community and social and influence, and I'm really excited because that's exactly what we're gonna cover in our chat today. So I'm gonna talk to you about social's impact and the current shift that we're in from an industry of influence to a culture of creators. So I want to start by asking, I want to see a show of hands. Has anybody heard of the millennial pause? Nobody, okay, we've got a lot to learn today. So the millennial pause is a term that was coined on TikTok. It is the fraction of a second before a creator starts filming a video where they, understandably, check themselves out, make sure that the camera's in frame, and honestly, make sure that the camera's on and recording. We are gonna show an example from TikTok creator Misha Pisha featuring the one and only Taylor Swift.
Hey guys, it's Taylor.
I am obsessed with the fact that not even Taylor the Swift is immune to the inevitable millennial obligatory pause before you start talking in a TikTok to make sure it's actually recording. God, will she ever stop being relatable? I love her.
Even global pop stars are not immune. So similarly, I assume nobody's heard of the Gen Z shake. The Gen Z shake is the absence of the millennial pause. We find that Gen Z tends to just immediately start filming before they even put the camera down. And that shake, that little chaotic moment, it does two things. One, it brings an air of authenticity, of a genuine moment, of a real connection. It's not rehearsed, it's not practiced, it's not staged. But then it does something else. It brings this second moment of chaos that brings you in. It brings in your attention and it captures you and holds your attention. So I am a millennial, and I pride myself as being part of the first generation that grew up living with social media. Nobody else understands what it's like to wait on AIM for your crush to sign on, or to publicly rank your friends in a MySpace top 8. Whoever said that was a good idea is absolutely crazy, and the 2000s were a weird time. But things have changed, right? And here we are in this new era of social media where we find that democratization reigns supreme. So things like the millennial pause and the Gen Z shake prove one thing, that these younger generations are not only completely changing the game, but they're changing the rules that it takes to play the game in terms of social media and influence. So I'm gonna do a few things. I think at this point, some of you are like, how do I play this game? Some of you are probably like, what are the rules? And I'm sure everybody here is like, who is she? Well, I'm here to tell you, my name is Jennah. I also come from sunny Los Angeles, and if you close your eyes and stand outside like yesterday and tap your heels 3 times together, it almost feels like you're there. I lead publisher education at TikTok, which, for those of you who don't know what TikTok is, we are one of the largest entertainment platforms out there today with over 150 million active users in the United States alone. We're known for fostering community, building engagement, and an amazing content recommendation system. I always say that I wish TikTok could find me a husband because it seems to know exactly what I want before I do. And it's really this fostering of community that's changed the game today. So this is why I'm here today and what we are gonna talk about. We're gonna cover 4 major things. We're gonna first talk about social media's impact on influence and society today. Then we're gonna talk about the democratization of social and what that means for you, your organization, and you as a corporate communicator. Then I'm gonna talk about this industry of influence and this economy and how it's really shifting right now into a culture of creators. And finally, I'm gonna give you some strategies on how to show up authentically in these spaces that we cover today. So in order to kind of talk about where we are today, we have to take a few steps back. I want to talk about a stage in my career in around 2013 where I worked for 2 different digital advertising agencies. The first one in 2013 really focused on long-form blog content. Around that time, everybody was really following mommy bloggers, recipes, lifestyle bloggers, fashion bloggers. It was all about that long-form desktop digital written content. It was my job to help these larger brands pair up with these blogging influencers and take thousands of photos and write these long-form articles with embedded links where people would get paid out, and that was the strategy for quite a while. Then a few years later, I moved to a different advertising agency where I saw a lot of familiar faces, similar bloggers, similar brands, but this time the medium was changing. We were moving from desktop onto mobile, and we were moving from that longer form blog content into a very visual heavy medium. Think Tumblr, Pinterest, Instagram. Now influence was a visual format, and it was working with these influencers and these brands to take thousands and thousands and thousands of photos until you find one that captures what these blogs would think would sell and posting it to these new formats of Instagram and ultimately Pinterest. Then I took a slight career change. In 2016, I started working for TMZ. For maybe our non-Los Angeles friends, that is a large media corporation that has a well-known website, multiple TV shows, podcasts, and even a celebrity tour that you can take in Hollywood today. As audience development manager at TMZ, it was my job to find out what types of content was resonating with users and what partnerships I could do with other large media publishers in the space. And I saw something super interesting in my time there at TMZ. More interesting than any Kardashian pregnancy, and yes, there were quite a few, and any Kanye meltdown, which there were also quite a few. And the thing I learned is the relationship between celebrities and influence was changing because of the hands of social media. For those of you who don't know how the media publication industry works, it's a symbiotic relationship with celebrities. These media organizations need the celebrities for content, and pre-social media, celebrities needed these media organizations to make a statement. Whether they were talking about a pregnancy, or maybe talking about a controversial issue, or even just doing press or promoting their new shoe line. They needed these media outlets to have these conversations and to have a voice. And I don't want to ruin this guys behind reality TV and entertainment press, but if a celebrity wanted to show up in an authentic way, they would stage a TMZ paparazzi shoot. But with the emergence of social media, all of this has changed. Celebrities no longer at the hands of these media corporations. They can make a statement through their own personal Instagram. They can make a statement on TikTok or Snapchat. So I saw that shift, and that really started to change the industry. But then, even more, there's another shift. More recently, we found a shift from an industry of influence to a culture of creators. There is a poll done by Harris on behalf of Lego that's found that kids surveyed in the United States and the UK were 3 times more likely to want to be YouTubers and vloggers than astronauts. This is changing because the way younger generations are taking in entertainment is through these social platforms. They see themselves in these creators and they want to be them. So what does that mean? Well, to get to where we are today, I think we need to take a little bit of a look back to 2005 with the democratization of social media. This culture of creators was able to come because in 2005, YouTube launched. And it meant that anybody with a camera and a good idea was able to sign on and create content. Brand partnerships loved this. This visual aid was ready to go. And YouTube really transformed into longer, highly polished content. And as this market became more saturated and there were more and more creators, the space started to shift. Enter Vine, a platform that is sadly no longer with us, but Vine was the first platform that actually shifted into that vertical video, mobile-first type of feed that we see today. And that type of democratization has changed the game so much that every single major player in the game has a similar feed. You've got Instagram Reels, you've got Snapchat Spotlight, you've got YouTube Shorts, and obviously, you've got TikTok. And that's really where you have this idea that all you need is a good idea and a phone. and you can create something truly, truly special. Now, I heard our friends at Nationwide talking about community, and I think that's one of the most wonderful things to come out of the democratization of internet. Because everybody has the chance to have a voice and everybody can be on platform, we're seeing diversity in thought, diversity in expression, and who can show up onto the platform. So, with that being said, how do you, as a corporate communicator and an organization, show up in these spaces in a way that feels authentic and credible? Because let's be real, as a business, we all have some type of motive. So how do you show up in a way that feels safe? And I always say the #1 way to do that is to create like a creator. And I have 3 easy steps for you to keep in mind to help you do just that. So #1 is understand who you're speaking to. Not all platforms are created equal. You have to make sure that you're showing up on these spaces in ways that feel unique and authentic to the platform. Know who's on that platform. Know how they're spending time. Then understand how they communicate. Are you using products and features that feel native to that platform? Are you communicating in a cadence or a voice that feels authentic to that platform? And then finally, understand who you are and what you as an organization bring to the table. All of these tips are important for your brand marketing strategy, regardless of what platform you're using. So I want to play this example by the New York Public Library because I think it does a really good version of all 3 of these things.
The New York Public Library used to be a giant reservoir for water.
Also, Bryant Park was a crystal palace. What?
It burnt down.
Back to the reservoir.
The Croton Reservoir was a massive above-ground reservoir. In the 1890s, it was no longer large enough to supply the entire city with water.
It was torn down, and the cornerstone was laid for the main branch of the New York Public Library. When the library was built, some of the stones were left intact. Here they are. We also have the keys to the reservoir.
So that was a TikTok by the New York Public Library, iconic. So I want to cover our 3 things through the lens of what we just watched. So understand who you're speaking to. The amazing thing about TikTok is we have 1.5 billion monthly active users worldwide. So there's literally something there for everybody. But when you think about who you're speaking to, you're thinking about a TikTok first platform. So you have to engage quickly. And if that didn't give you chaotic Gen Z shake vibes, I don't really know what does. And then understand how they communicate. So the text on screen, the green screen in the back to add additional context clues. All of those features feel native to the platform and are really going to help you as an organization be authentic and show up in these spaces. And then finally, understand who you are and what you bring to the table. Quite literally a house of knowledge, the New York Public Library showed up in this space as a thought leader and really showing mind-blowing, myth-busting, perception-changing facts about an iconic institution that maybe you thought you already knew. And it's a really fun way to kind of make an impact. So now that you've got these basics, I'm about to give you my 7 strategies to help you stand out in this sea of 1.5 billion users. So here are my 7 strategies for success. First, we just covered it, but have a strong understanding of your values and your voice. As I mentioned before, this is like step #1. If you can't get here, do not move further. Take your time, really understand who you are, what your values are, and when I say your voice, what's your personality? How do you communicate? And would you communicate in pop culture issues that are happening in the world? Because I always say, if it's happening in the real world, it's happening on TikTok. And the same thing should be with all of these spaces. These are ways for people to communicate. You need to know how your organization is going to show up. With that being said, champion diverse voices. It is 2023 with 1.5 billion users all over the world. Everybody needs to be able to see themselves in these spaces. If you and your organization are showing up, make sure you're representing the world that we live in today. 3, partner with creators. So this is an absolutely amazing way to cross-pollinate new communities and to reach new audiences in an authentic way. So creators have done an amazing way of showing up on platform and creating a name for themselves and establishing a community, usually by themselves. Creators are usually a one-person show. They usually are directors, they are stylists, they are writers, they are actors, they are brand strategists, all in one. So they know the space better than you do. Sometimes it's hard to let that go. Sometimes it's hard for your creative director to let that go. But I really recommend that your relationship is going to be so much more fruitful if you let the creators take control. 2, do your homework. You want to make sure that the creator that you partner with matches those values in your voice that you established in point number 1. Where do you even get started with finding a creator that matches your voice and values? Well, I always recommend doing a quick search in whatever platform that you're planning on posting on of your organization. Take a look at the content that already exists amongst your organization organically. If a creator is making content about your organization organically, they likely have an affinity for it, share your values, and have a community that has affinity for what you're bringing to the table. And then I said it, but I'll say it again, give the creators creative control, please. Be very clear when you communicate about what your expectations are, how many rounds of revisions, what content formats you want, what you want the deliverable or the main objective to be. But the more you communicate and the more you be hands-off, the more fruitful that connection is going to be. Budget for social media. Just because the platform is free doesn't mean your partnership is free. You need to budget to pay creators. They're doing all of those roles at once. You need to set aside money for commercial music licensing, for audio video licensing, and for any other type of partnership. Do you want to rent a space for the day? Do you need costumes? Make sure you budget aside. Test and experiment. So this is a 2-part situation. First of all, I need you to test and experiment with absolutely everything. So that is, as long as you've got, now keep in mind your strong brand voice, right? We're not gonna lose that. But test and experiment with content formats, long, short, with products and features. So duetting, stitching, remixing, text on screen, voiceover to show personality, maybe different faces in your organization. Really test and experiment. And then part 2 of that is, don't be afraid to flop. It's gonna happen. You can't create a viral sensation every single time, but you can learn from every single flop and every single video. So pay attention to your analytics, like watch time, engagement, comments, likes, who's saving your video, what about that video? Or maybe they're only watching 2 seconds out of the 2.5-minute video. Why? Why are they dropping off at that time? Every flop is a chance to succeed again. Then we have, spend time on platform mindfully. I tell all of my partners spend at least 15 minutes a day on TikTok, any platform, spend time on there. And I promise you, if you're anything like me, 15 minutes on TikTok will soon be 95 minutes. I say an Avengers worth of time on the platform. But really spend time mindfully. So search a few of your favorite things in the search bar and see what comes up. What makes you click? What doesn't? Spend time watching a video. How long did you stay on that video? Why? Did you go to the comments? What drove you to the comments? What would drive you to the comments? And more importantly, as you're scrolling on the glorious, endless For You feed, what makes you stop your scroll? Because if it makes you stop your scroll, it's probably gonna motivate a member of your community to do the same. And finally, have fun. The message and our North Star at TikTok is to inspire creativity and bring joy, and that's what all of these social platforms are. We're all looking for connection, we're all looking for authenticity, and we're all looking for some type of escapism, and that needs to shine through in the content that you're creating. So, thank you so much for having me today. I just want to remind you, with the democratization of social and this new age of creating like a creator, the next viral superstar is very likely in this room. And with my tips, your odds have never been better. So, I can't wait to see you on my For You feed. Thank you. Should I?
You're not off the hook yet, Howard. Thank you. That was fun. All right. So I hope you're bringing some questions or comments to mind, because we're going to have about 15 minutes to ask these amazing emergent voices some questions. So let me just start by saying, wow, a very, very different take across this whole panel on what it means to have and exercise influence. but also there were some themes there that kept coming through. I wrote down things like diversity and understanding and access. And so what I'd like to just start off with is just asking how you think about taking the voice that you have and the access that you have and making that available to others. Can you start off with that a little bit, Emily?
Sure. I am very thoughtful about my voice, and I do the millennial shake anytime I post on Instagram. And I think I historically have shared my voice very much so in my writing. I have a Medium blog page. I share my voice through companies, through my speaking engagements, and it really hit me so hard when this article was published last year in LA's Modern Love column, because the kind of array of people who reached out, some with disabilities, some without, all genders, all orientations, it was so stunning to me to see the impact of my voice. And so, I think my first inclination to your question is I am highly intentional with my voice whenever I use it publicly, just because I know of the impact it has on people.
Howard, your work is really, the design point of it is to enable others to access and to have that kind of access. Just say a little bit about what that means to you personally and how you pull that through.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's funny, I have a really amazing team and partners in my work, and one of the things that we talk about is this idea of, in our work, being a B2B social impact organization.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because we think that in our world, digital products and services are the linchpin to providing access in this new era, and that's not coming from one organization, however successful we might be. It's about helping every organization become better digital publishers. And so our whole mission is about enabling the teams, because it's design, it's tech, it's content, it's marketing, it's product, it's business, and the organizations themselves becoming better digital publishers. So everything we do is about giving other people tools to provide better access.
Yeah, to create the space for it. Jennah, you said something about going from influencers to creators, and when we were talking before the session, a week or so ago, you were very you were very specific about that. Say a little bit about that. Why creator rather than influencer?
Yeah, because I think it kind of comes with that, and I had the Kardashians on the screen because I just feel like they're always selling something, tequila, shapewear, like it's always happening. And I feel like there really is that shift from almost that Pinterest format where everything was really beautiful and polished and professionally generated. And I think this new democratization of social, where we want to see this kind of more chaotic, unpolished, but like authentic approach to influence. And it's creation, it's sharing, it's this more natural as you are like me and I am like you, and I want to share this connection, not I want to push my expensive overpriced tequila on you. And I think that's the difference.
I think you might have just created a new product category with tequila shapewear.
Honestly, I would probably buy it.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that. I think also one of the themes that came up across all of your stories is one of understanding, and not just understanding others, but also understanding yourself. And I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about that. This idea of understanding others, but having to scale it, having to scale that. And Emily, in your example, it was like, okay, well, I need to understand not only my own inner voice, but in this organization, there's all of these people as a head of people.
Yeah.
How do you think about being able to have that kind of understanding of yourself and others when there's so many?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is why I love being ahead of people and working with workplaces on culture that's step number one, is knowing yourself. And I think that gets minimized too often in manager training or in CEO coaching, is that's step number one. And, particularly when you're talking about voice, right, as an organization, we have to know who the organization is, what our values are. And part of that is, the CEOs and founders need to know, who are they? And is that synonymous, and how does that inform communications? But anyway, back to management, it's I think it's there's so many things here, but everyone has to have a growth mindset. And it's all about, how do you infuse your culture with understanding each other and understanding yourself. And there are a variety of ways to do that through coaching and assessments and candid conversations, but it takes work.
Yeah.
It takes really intentional work. Yeah. And the bigger you are, to your point, the more employees you have, the harder it is to scale. Yeah. Which is why having the right people team and people leaders or consultants or whomever, it's critical.
Howard, we've talked about various approaches. When we worked together, we did a lot with design thinking and agile and so on. And these are great methods, and it's almost a way to get empathy, work empathy in there. But what I was hearing you say is essentially that's great, but we're going to need to automate to get broader.
Yeah.
What's the sort of critical point of failure for some of these things that I think are well known and adored, design thinking? What's happening?
Yeah, well, I'll say something incredibly provocative, which is design thinking is dead. And the reason why I say that is because I think we've gotten to a place where it's so rote. It's not created in a way that actually brings people to the table in an effective way. And if it does, you're talking about maybe tens of people at best. In fact, I've led hundreds of different design thinking workshops in my career, and I'd say probably about 10% of them have actually brought in a diverse set of representative users. Wow. Mainly because of budget.
Yeah.
And time.
Yeah.
And so really it becomes an echo chamber within the organization. At that same time, design thinking is essential. It's really important. So, but what we're focused on is using macro data about audiences combined with individual interactions in places like design thinking. It's the combination of the two that we have to evolve to, right? So I think the idea that you're going to solve problems for hundreds of millions of people or even thousands of people by bringing in two people, you might feel connected to them, but you're not going to understand them.
Yeah.
And so thinking about diversity in data and inclusion in data, that's the thing we have to move towards.
And I love that point, because we've talked quite a bit about diversity this morning, and it's a much broader sense of diversity. It's a much broader sense of inclusion as well. Questions, comments from the audience, please. Am I using silence well? Questions, comments, anyone online?
Hi.
Sorry, thank you.
No, that's fine.
Please introduce yourself.
It's Mary Lynn Carver. I'm with Kite Pharma, used to be at General Mills. And it's Jeremy, is that right? Do I have the right name? No, Howard, sorry.
Howard.
A gift and an ask, because you asked us a very specific question, which was, how do you break through? Risk registry. Whoever's running risk within organizations, and oftentimes the chief communications officer is either chairing that group or is co-chairing it. So that might be
That's great.
A place
I'm going to find you.
Okay. And the other ask, which was specifically to hone in on healthcare. We have such an issue with access, and so much is moving to digital. And you were talking about tools. So is there anyone designing tools that are specific to the healthcare space? If not, please do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big focus for us. Thank you.
Is there anyone doing that work now that you're aware of?
Some, yes, and I can find you afterwards. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Other questions? Bevan.
Okay. Hi. Oh.
Hi, Bevan.
Okay, now that you're all awake, hi, Howard.
Hi, Bevan.
Okay, so I'm going to throw out a rapid-fire whip-around question for the three of you. COVID. It changed things like how elderly people were not getting the vaccine, and we had like tech moms at night helping old people figure out how to actually get on the queue to get their vaccines, so we weren't dumping as many vaccines in the state of New York. We had people suddenly starting to get online and blog, and I had teenagers, and quiplash became more important than going to bars because you couldn't go to bars. We had new creators coming out because they were stuck in their studio apartments. But then we kind of like got out of COVID and we got vaccinated, and people were like, holding on to poles again in the subway and like touching things, and young people were kissing each other again. COVID, like, what do you think we learned that we kept hold of in these spaces, and what did we accidentally drop that you wish we kept? Whip around answers.
Wow.
Don't make me go first. Oh, that's such a great question. Oh man, going first. Okay, well, I wanted to cover kind of all of social, but I think we can't talk about COVID without talking about TikTok's kind of emergence in the scene, right? I think us all being in lockdown and that desperation for connection and all of that is kind of what made TikTok able to thrive so quickly. I think a few things. One, I think all of us kind of being locked in this democratization of content, we're seeing more than ever amazing attention and influence to things that I kind of didn't cover today because we kept it light and fluffy, but like the women's movement in Iran. Like it's spreading light on moments that we weren't able to before, and I think it's sharing a lot of experiences and information that I think we're keeping, and that is great. What it is a little bit tricky with, I think, is misinformation, which I think is a problem internet-wide and social-wide that's not just kind of limited to TikTok. But I think a lot of us during kind of COVID began to grab information from these sources, but maybe stopped to think about where they come from, or fact-checking and things like that. So I think it's kind of this double-edged sword where COVID's brought us closer together than ever and is allowing us to see new perspectives and new ideas. But I also think we might have lost touch of real journalism, and it's a double-edged sword. No one's perfect.
All right. That's a great question. I think one thing that we really saw emerge from the pandemic is I saw this trend of a lot of people, myself included, kind of reevaluating what's valuable to them and how they define value. We saw a lot of people leaving jobs, we saw a lot of people traveling, and so I'm super interested in kind of this redefinition of value that I think we have started and are going to continue to have in society. And then the second piece of that of like, what do I wish we would keep? I think the pandemic clearly caused us to change a lot of things in our workplaces. And I feel like we're slowly creeping back into kind of how things were before. And I feel like we need to be really intentional about, whether it's maintaining the flexibility that came during the pandemic or the intentionality people had with culture. I think I'm a little wary of we may be creeping into bad habits, or not bad habits, but just older habits that are never gonna, the pandemic forever changed workplaces, and I think we just need to acknowledge that and remember it.
Some wonderful things and some things that were not great, and like let's preserve the good things and not return to the mean on the things we don't. Howard.
Yeah, just a quick answer. I mean, for me, COVID was the thing that that was the genesis of this transition for me from a career and a mission perspective. I was at MetLife, and I was managing teams around the world, and in New York City, what I saw was the people that were digitally savvy were able to get the vaccine appointments, to get tested. There was this article that came out in the New York Times around then about, and it was like Reddit. Reddit communities, like if you're, if you can't access the vaccine website and you're older, like we'll help you. And like, that's like heartwarming and wonderful, but it's a demonstration of a complete failure of our digital worlds. And there was this article that came out in the New York Times, and the quote was, when you have a 20-year-old and an 80-year-old racing to try to access digital resources, that's not a race, that's elder abuse. And that was that moment in time was I think You know, like that was a national emergency, but it happens every day. So for me, that was an instrumental moment.
Thanks for that, Howard. We have a question from a virtual attendee. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, Asha Zumuda from Mayo Clinic. Any advice on how we can best influence our C-suite leaders to be open to trying some of these new tools? Just really in the fear of the idea of giving creative control to creators, whether it's influencers or our own employees, and sort of the fear of losing the message.
Yeah. Oh man, what a great question. Can I?
That's for you.
Go ahead.
Okay, so a few things. One, as I mentioned today, spend time on platform. Like, I think a lot of people who don't know these platforms or don't spend time on them think that it's all like dance videos. And although there's a fair share of that, and there's definitely a community for dancing, there's so much amazing content. We have a STEM feed. We have the videos like the New York Public Library that I showed. It's all based on instructive, educational, informative content. There's literally something for everyone. So I think making sure these key stakeholders understand the platform and what the power can do and how it can really foster community. And it's easier said than done, I suppose, but really sitting them down and getting them to kind of see the impact that it can have and the good that is on there, I think is huge. In terms of trusting creators, that's why I hammered it home. It's hard to do, but you just have to have faith in knowing that, well, one, obviously doing your homework and who you pick and making sure those values kind of align and you've done a thorough background check on their past branded campaigns or you know, who they've been vocal about or what causes they've been vocal about for sure. But I think just trusting that, you know, these creators have done what organizations do, usually as a one-person show.
Yeah.
And I think that you can't discredit that. It's a huge job, and they really just know what they're doing. And so I would say my biggest thing is have these stakeholders spend time on platform. You might have to sit down and do it with them. But I think that's the key to really seeing impact.
I loved your number one, the don't pass go if you don't know your own values and your own voice. And I think that might be the theme. That might be the theme here.
Because Emily said the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you understand your values and your voice, then you have an opportunity potentially to invite others in and to make to share your platform as well. Thank you. The three of you have been just very moving, very thought-provoking. Thank you very much, Jennah, Howard, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.